Okay, I think I just had the batteries in wrong the last time, so oh please, come on, work, please. Oh my
G'day my gorgeous goblins and welcome to Darkwood Fantasy Creatures. My name's Aileen and this video has been a long time coming, but I hope this was worth the wait. It's been well over a year since I first even conceived the idea of sharing my work here on YouTube, and life just kept getting in the way. That said though, I hope this is the first of many videos that I plan to upload to YouTube, as I plan on recording all of my projects from here on out. And I apologize if this looks like it was filmed on a baked potato, because it might as well have been. Outside of Photoshop, I'm not at all a technical person, so I apologize for the poor quality. I'm still learning and I still have a lot to learn. But with that said, let's get on to today's project.
Ew, gosh, that's so gross.
So, as you've probably seen from the video by now, I took a Barbie Lux doll and stuck her head onto a Hermione Granger doll, and after removing her hair plugs, I then removed her flocking using 100% acetone, and then moved on to removing her face paint, which took a lot of elbow grease.
Okay, now the other eye.
And after a lot of scrubbing with acetone, you should have something like this. Now with the face and body all clean, let's move on to hair. Looking through my supplies, I have quite a good selection of nylon doll hair that I believe I purchased from the Doll Planet a couple years ago now, and even though her design does have red hair, I was half tempted to make her look like a Vocaloid using the seafoam green hair, but ultimately I decided to stick with the design. But before we begin the reroute, let's paint the scalp a matching colour so then that way it won't show through the fibres. And now that the scalp is dry, let's move on to the reroute. Taking a few strands of hair, I then loop it onto my rerouting tool, which is just a needle shoved into a chopstick, and stab it into the head. And once you've done that about 100 times, you should be left with something that looks like a sea urchin. And now with the reroute out of the way, let's tuck the hair back for now and move on to the body. As you can see, I've already sanded off her factory marks and moulded on underwear, and now we can move on to making her look like a porcelain doll. Taking some muslin fabric, I glued it to her torso, and using my favourite 2-part epoxy sculpt, I sculpted details over it to make it look like her body is segmented. Even though it will be hidden underneath her clothes, I really love the look of those old antique dolls with the fabric bodies but with porcelain faces and limbs, and I wanted to try and replicate that somehow with her design. And with the sculpting now complete, let's set it aside to cure. And now that it's all cured, I sanded it down and primed it with Mr. Super Clear so she's all ready for painting. Be sure to use a mask when using this stuff. For her face up, I'm using soft pastels and Faber-Castell watercolour pencils. But before we get to the face up, we have to cover up the epoxy first. Using a mix of watered-down acrylic paint between layers of MSE, I was able to build up a nice porcelain-like appearance. And using a mix of brown acrylic paint and water, I dirtied up her appearance. The whole premise of her design is she is a discarded, doll-like automaton who was left to rot in a scrapyard, but instead she now regains her sentience and she goes about fixing and selling the things she makes. And now using Mungyo soft pastels, we blush the body. Using watercolour pencils, I draw out the basic look of what I want to the face, and then I fill it in with acrylic paint. Try as I might, I have tried to do face-ups with just pencil, but I can't get anywhere near as much opacity as what I've seen some other doll artists be able to manage, so acrylic paint and my heavy hands it is. And this is the whole doll after blushing and painting. I really wanted to drive home the broken doll aesthetic, so I covered her body in a bunch of crack marks and even a little band-aid. Now with the body done, let's move on to fixing the hair. After freeing it from the hair burrito, we put it into another hair burrito. This way it'll be protected and held in shape when I blast it with the heat gun. And after being freed a second time and given a much needed haircut, this is what we're left with. I ended up having to make the headband off camera as it involved doll hair next to an open flame, but I essentially shaped pieces of warbler into this little mechanical headset, and I embellished it with these little gears and cogs that I believe were for nail art. Once I was happy with the shape of the headband, I went in with my Citadel metallic paints and covered it with a nice shade of copper. I also added a bit of gold in there just to give it a bit of colour variation, because oftentimes when you look at old metal, it doesn't tend to stay the same colour for long. Speaking of not staying the same colour, I'm also applying a little bit of patina using some mixed up blue and green paint. This will give it a really nice aged look, like she's been out in the scrapyard for a long time with no maintenance. And now that the doll's head and body is complete, let's move on to her outfit. Looking through my fabric hoard, I picked out a nice selection of fabrics that'd go well for this project. And using the clothes the doll came with, I created a pattern to make these. And speaking of clothes the doll came with, rather than forming entirely new shoes, I decided to use the shoes that the doll came with and simply embellish them. Using a lighter and some sculpting tools, I melted some warbler down and shaped these little buttons. You can always leave them black as it is traditional, or you could go with chartreuse, but I decided to go with gold to make the beldam jealous. The rest of the outfit could use some detailing too, it's looking pretty flat. So using some acrylic paint and a dry brush, I dry brushed the fabric to give it some extra dimension. And with that done, let's dress her up and see how she looks all put together. She looks good. Let's move on to her backpack. Actually, we have to move first. Remember how I said at the beginning that life kept getting in the way? Well, I mean it. Around the time I really began recording, the housing crisis hit, and the place I was renting went up for sale. During this time, I did a bit more work on the doll here and there, between moving, packing, and crying. Mainly giving her her tail, and working on her backpack.
I think I just had the batteries in wrong the last time, so if, oh please, come on, work, please.
As you can probably tell from that reaction, this was my first time working with LEDs by myself. And to say I was pleased would be a massive understatement. Also, fun fact about the soy sauce bottle, it was actually meant to be a miniature milk bottle, but I just couldn't figure out how I was supposed to make that. So I went with a soy sauce bottle instead. And also an extra big thank you to my older brother for 3D printing the milk crate for her backpack. I also decorated her stand too, as, well, she can't really stand up with the weight of the backpack, but she does look good with it regardless.
Do you mind?
And with that said, she's done. And with her out of the way, let's get started on her companion. After shaping tinfoil into a base, I then use the placeholder eyes to figure out if I'm pleased with the sizing or not, and then we move on to sculpting. I also have references for raccoon dogs on hand because, as my friend KP Creations always says,
references people references.
And yes, I am aware there are better ways I could shape the tinfoil for the base. However, this is just what works for me. I like having the option to reshape the base if I change my mind. Which I also have a bad habit of doing. Often. I'm not really sure either how to explain my process when it comes to sculpting. Generally, I've done it so much that I can memorize shapes and how to place them when it comes to forming a figure. But oftentimes it just comes to me staring at references and trying my best to mimic them in a 3D format. I am hoping in the future though I can offer more in-depth tutorials, but right now I'm still more or less figuring out the technical aspect of putting together YouTube videos. And now, with the base sculpt complete, let's move on to sculpting their flames. Yep, that's right, this tanuki has got some spirit fire. Using my sculpting tools, I etched out the grooves on where the flames will sit on the scalp, and I made sure to carve some holes so then that way the LEDs can fit through. Using tinfoil, I mapped out the shape of what I wanted the flames to look like, and using 2-part epoxy sculpt, I sculpted them into shape. And now we move on to casting. Using 2-part epoxy resin, I mixed it up with some alcohol ink in the colour Sapphire Blue, along with some glitter to add a bit of sparkle. And then I just poured it into the mould. And while they're curing, let's clean any spilled resin off at the desk and then finish sculpting the tanuki. And once they're baked, we can move on to their eyes. I painted a few different designs onto cardstock using acrylic paint because I was unsure of what I wanted them to look like. And I embellished each of them with these little star sequins. And after placing a drop of UV resin into the mold, I place the iris on top of it and there we go. After the first layer of UV resin is cured, I then mixed up some UV resin and acrylic paint and poured that over top to form the whites, I guess blacks of the eyes. It was also at this point I inserted the LEDs before curing with the UV lamp. And now that the flames and eyes are ready, let's see how they all look put together. Looks good. Let's paint. As per usual with all of my creatures, I'm just using acrylic paint cut with water. And while it may seem redundant, I prefer to work from darkest to lightest colours, so I tend to paint the base black before I start laying down any actual colour or definition with other, well, shades and colours. I'm certain there are easier ways to do it, but this is just what works for me. And now that the paint job is done, let's seal it with some matte varnish cut with water. And now that he's all painted and sealed, let's have a look at how the LEDs look. Looks good. But he needs more sparkle. It wouldn't really feel like one of my creatures unless he had some form of gemstone on him. These little stars will do. Oh, they look so cute. Now let's finally move on to making his body. Using a 20 gauge galvanized wire, I twisted into shape to form a skeleton. But wait, you're wondering, where's his leg? Well, you'll see later on. For now, let's bulk up his body using quilt wadding. Obviously in big sheets like this, it's not really usable, but by cutting it into smaller strips, we can wrap it around the skeleton. And after many, many layers, you should have something like this. Now, let's give this bad boy some fluff. After sifting through my first stash, I decided on these ones. While this fur isn't the exact shade of blue that I want, the base of it is, so at the very least I won't have to soak dye it, and I can get away with just airbrushing it. And after cutting out all of my pattern pieces, I sew it together with a needle and thread. And once it's all sewn together, I very, very gently weasel it onto the body and stitch it into place. Once he's all sewn up, he should look like this. Taking a pair of scissors, I very carefully trim down his legs so at the very least he doesn't look like a complete walking pom-pom. Speaking of trimming fur, I take tufts of hair and very carefully glue it to the face to blend everything together. And if you're wondering where the battery pack for the LEDs went, I stitched a little pocket into the back of his neck where it can hide. Remember the missing leg? Well, this is it. Using giant popsicle sticks, Warbler, and Delightful's tutorials, I was able to construct this completely removable prosthetic leg. It can be assembled using the nuts and bolts provided, and it can be secured to the body using the buckle on the straps. Considering his companion is also made out of porcelain, I wanted to include some porcelain elements into his leg. And so I shaped this thermoplastic into these porcelain armor plates. And after painting the base of the leg with metallics, I painted it to look like porcelain. Okay, I couldn't resist the urge to put more sparkle on there, so I just had to put some gold on there to finish it off. And of course, it wouldn't be one of my creations without my official stamp. So, I made use of the empty space and stamped it in plain sight. And finally, the last thing I made was his saddle and bridle, which I lost the footage for. I plan on making more saddled creatures in the future, so I'll definitely record it at some point, but I was very disappointed that I lost this footage. I was actually quite proud with how it turned out. But with that out of the way, let's assemble him and call it done. Everyone, say hello to Caroline the Scrapyard Keeper and her companion, Akimitsu the Spirit Fire Tanuki. Oh my gosh, what an insane year this has been. So much has changed in such a seemingly small amount of time, and yet I can't believe this video is finally done. After just so many setbacks that seem like they'd never end, I'm already looking forward to uploading my next video. And I can't thank you all enough for your support and sticking with me throughout this time. Thank you. And an extra special thank you to the people over on my GoFundMe who helped me get this project off the ground to begin with. Without them, I wouldn't even been able to afford the tripod to start recording. So with that said, an extra special thank you to Giovanna V, Anthony Nowak, Chaos Costumes, and Leslie Harry. Thank you all so much.